Welcome back. It is Amy and Britt back with you discussing overcoming healthcare burnout.
All right, so let's get into kind of what are the causes or the drivers of burnout. Though you can kind of use those interchangeably. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about here comes from Dr. Christina Maslach. She is a psychologist who defined burnout and has created the Maslach burnout inventory scale that a lot of hospitals are using. Some of her work applies to all vocations and fields, but then there's some specific stuff made for the healthcare industry. And so we're going to talk about the drivers of burnout and why it's happening so much. And I think that this can be particularly helpful, not just to know why it's happening, but to kind of identify, like, as you're listening to me talk about this, I'd like you to kind of see just what jumps out at you. Like, just kind of tune in and pay attention to that little voice inside that's like, ooh, it's that right there. That's what I'm feeling at work. And some of these are definitely going to jump out at you more than others. And so we'll talk about it. We'll kind of talk about some examples. And then I think just being able to name these things really, really helps us. So we'll get started. We have a little kind of picture, a wheel that Amy will pull up as we talk about these, okay? But the first driver of burnout is going to be a mismatch between the demands or the job stressors and the adaptive capacity. Okay, so basically, too much work, not enough time. Um, Here we go. So we're going to be focusing on that first one, workload, right? And I think most of us can probably relate to this, feeling like there's too much on our plate and we can only be stretched so far, right? I can only be in one patient room at a time. And too much work and too much charting and too high of acuity, but too many regulatory requirements and too much paperwork to fill out and not enough time and not enough ability to adapt. And so that is the number one driver. And I think it sounds very similar to our actual definition of healthcare burnout in Dr. Tom Mayer's book, right? So that is going to be kind of the most obvious driver. And we talked a little bit earlier about how a lot of that is our resource limitations, not having enough staff, and things like that. So workload is the number one driver, mismatch between demands and capacity. So what is the second driver? Second driver is going to be a loss of control. Now, this is one I hear the most from physicians. I don't hear this in my work with healthcare workers. I don't hear this as much from nurses. But I do hear it a lot from physicians. So when clinicians who went into the career to make things happen, to make decisions, to be able to trust their training, their knowledge, their instinct, are suddenly having things happening to them that they don't get to control anymore, can very rapidly lead to burnout. Okay. So when providers are not able to provide the care that lines up with their values because they don't have the power anymore, they don't have the control. So I hear from physicians that they feel this way a lot when they're forced to see patients way too quickly, right? So they're not able to utilize their care the way they want to care for patients because they're being rushed through way too many patients and they don't have a choice in that matter. So that's an issue. The other thing is just like hospital regulatory requirements, things like that, processes, systems that take away control from the physicians and their ability to make decisions and their ability to get the patients what they feel they need. And so that I feel like is something I hear a lot from the doctors that I work with. So first one is workload or a mismatch between work and capacity. Second one is loss of control. Third one is going to be lack of rewards or recognition. So some facilities are obviously going to be a lot better at this than others, but take a moment to think about where you work. Like how well are they doing at providing rewards and recognitions to those A team members? How often do you feel rewarded and recognized in your work? When that's absent, when that's lacking, that's a huge driver of burnout. Many of us, right? We went into healthcare, we know how to work hard, right? We got through nursing school, many of you got through med school, tremendous amount of stress and sleeplessness and studying and training and all the things. We're not afraid of some hard work, but I think many of us feel discouraged and start to feel burnout when there's a lack of rewards or recognition. And this is a little bit of a caveat, but I am going to just challenge us right now that, like, yes, we do deserve rewards and recognition from our organizations and our healthcare systems and our hospitals, but this is also something we can provide to one another. And I think that Dr. Tom Mayer actually talks about that in his book, about the importance of us thanking our team members, and thanking one another. And it was funny because as I was reading about this piece, this lack of rewards and recognition, somebody specific popped into my mind, and it's a physician that I work with who, from the very first time I worked with him, I had been at this facility a long time. He came in a number of years ago, and I didn't know him at all. And our first shift together was absolutely atrocious. Super busy, not enough staff. It was insane, lots of high acuity patients. And from the first shift I worked with him, I thought, man, I like this doctor. I like his style. I feel like he's really competent. And there was just something about him, and he worked really well with the staff. And it took me a long time to realize what it was. And I realize now that part of what it was is that he would always include the nurses that he trusted in the discussion and the plan of care. So there was a lot of camaraderie and teamwork. But the other piece was he always thanked us. Like after every difficult case, after, like, specifically, he would come over to me and say, "Hey, yeah, that was a tough patient. I've been super busy. Thank you so much for picking up on that change and letting me know." And like would go out of his way to thank me as a nurse working with him. And I really think that that went such a long way. And I didn't even realize that that's what it was. But just getting that reward and recognition, like somebody is noticing that I am busting my tail caring for these really sick patients right now. And just that little bit of reward and recognition went a long way. And so I just, not having that is a big driver of burnout. And I think we can all relate to that, like wanting to have someone thank us for our hard work, our blood, sweat, and tears. So I would also encourage you guys, as you're listening to this, like think about who you can thank in your job. Is it the tech? Is it the environmental services without which we would be in big trouble, right? Everybody's important and deserves some recognition for their hard work. So third one is lack of rewards or recognition as a driver of burnout. The fourth thing is going to be, it actually skips here, but the fourth one is actually loss of community or camaraderie. So that orange one on the screen there. We say team, but do we play team? And this is an example that Dr. Mayer gives in his book, and this really hit home for me because I have experienced stuff like this before. And his example is when an ER nurse can't round on an inpatient, without being made to feel like a criminal, our team has broken down, right? When we have compartmentalized so much and we have broken down that sense of team, it's a big problem. And I think a huge part of that problem is going to be the turnover that we're seeing. When most hospitals have an entirely new staff every 5 years, that team is not necessarily going to be that strong, right? I mean, Amy and I actually worked together in one of the best teams I've ever worked with. How long ago was that, Amy? 15, 16, 14 years, way back. Amy was a more experienced nurse when I was a baby nurse. And I feel like we had a great team back then. And, you could probably think back in your career to the A team that you worked with, the best team you ever had, where like, you don't even have to ask for the thing you need. Someone's already handing it to you. And there's this like incredible, smooth, well-oiled machine. And a lot of those A teams that you work with, like you have that sense of connection with them, right? That camaraderie. Maybe you do things together outside of work. There's a true team spirit. Is there anything you want to add to that, Amy?
No, I was just thinking that you were the code queen. You got all the codes. You got all the really sick people. And I was really thankful when Britt was at work because she would take all those patients.
I was a lucky new grad. They threw me a lot of learning opportunities.
A lot. She learned a lot.
Yeah. So I think most of us can kind of easily identify the difference between the quality of care we're able to deliver, first of all, when we're working with a good team versus a team that we don't feel connected with, or maybe nurses we're not used to working with, or a brand new doctor who we don't know exactly his style or her style or what she's going to order next or what she, I think that there's a really important community piece to us not burning out. And that sense of camaraderie actually really, really works against and helps us battle and prevent burnout in our teams.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so that was number 4, loss of community. Number 5, we're going to go up to that kind of teal colored one, is a lack of fairness. Um, a lack of fairness drives burnout. So when okay, when health systems at baseline, hospitals, units, managers, whoever, are asking their staff to do more with less all the time, that is inherently unfair. And I don't know about you, but being in healthcare, I haven't been in healthcare that long. I started working in my first job in the ER as a clerk. I was 20 and I'm 37 now. So 17 years total. I've only been a nurse for like 14 of those years, but I've seen a big change even in that amount of time as far as, right? We're always moving towards do more with less, do more with less. So better metrics, more charting, more requirements with less staff, less resources. And that is inherently unfair unless the staff has a voice in some of these decisions and in some of these systems. Um, there's a quote from Battling Healthcare Burnout that I like here, and I'm going to go ahead and read it. The leader's concern is inversely proportional to his or her distance from the source of the problem. So often, the healthcare administrators and people at the top who are making these decisions are very distanced from the actual work that's going on the units. And that's a problem because then the people, especially, physicians feel this way too, a lot of the time, are not getting a voice in how it's going. And that leads to that loss of control as well. And that's actually, let's be honest, if it's unfair to staff, that's also unfair to patients. It's unfair to patients' lack of access to high quality care clinically is a significant source of burnout in healthcare. So when we see a lot of these things breaking down and we see the care that patients are receiving suffering, that's a big problem, right? So lack of fairness. And that can also, we can get burnout just from seeing a lack of fairness in the way patients are treated for whatever reason, whether it's their ability to pay or other things like when, that can really cause a lot of moral injury and moral distress, which can also be a driver of burnout if patients aren't getting fair care. And the last one at the bottom there is going to be, it says purpose on this photo. Dr. Maslach calls it a loss of values or a loss of purpose. So this can be for us personally or organizationally. So organizationally, when the words on the walls don't line up with the happenings in the halls, is what Dr. Mayer says. And I think a lot of us can relate to this, right? You might be working a shift on your unit and look at the wall and see the vision statement there, or you can see the name of your unit that's named after something with meaning or whatever it is, or you look at your email and you see all these values that are talked about in your work email coming from administration. But then what you see when you see what's happening in the halls, and it's not, it's patients not getting access to the things they need in a timely manner, or it's that not having enough staff to spend any time with the patients and give them the quality of care you feel they deserve. That's can be very distressing when we feel like what's happening doesn't line up with the values of the system we're working for, what they claim to have. And then also with ourselves too, we talked about moral injury and moral distress. When we hold ourselves to a certain standard, like this is the kind of care I would want for myself. This is the kind of care I would want for my loved one, my family member, my child. And when we can't deliver that same level of care because of resource issues, staffing issues, for whatever reasons, hospital policy issues, that can create a lot of moral distress in us, and that would fall under a loss of values. And we talked about this before a little bit, but moral distress happens when people are asked to do something that offends their values, or when they observe that the system in which they work fundamentally betrays its values. And so that's why it's so important for us to know what our values are and what our purpose is, and then to be able to identify when we feel that tension or that friction that like, yeah, gosh, this isn't lining up with my values. And is there ways that I can address that, or ways that I can um, be more in alignment with my values and my purpose. And then also that we advocate systemically in our healthcare systems organizationally, to make sure that we can do that. So those are the six Maslach domains of burnout. And yeah, I'd like you to kind of just take it one last look at it and see if any of those really jumped out at you
Your
more
robot.
than others.
So I want to talk about a few commonalities against healthcare people, especially nurses, because I know more nurses probably. But we tend to be perfectionists. We want everything to be perfect, and we expect ourselves to have all of the answers and hold ourselves to very high standards. Does any of this sound familiar? I think it's a very common. Doctors too, of course. I think everybody, when they come to work and want to do their best, hold themselves to very high standards and want to be as perfect of a worker as possible. This might seem like a good thing, but because we want to do an amazing job, right? But the problem comes when we start beating ourselves up for not being perfect. Spoiler alert, no one is perfect. And realistically, the idea of perfectionism hinders us in our growth because it sets unrealistic expectations about what we're capable of. In reality, all that we can do is to show up and do our absolute best and know that we will learn from our experiences. So maybe we didn't have a great shift, maybe something happened that we feel responsible for. The only thing that we can do is learn from it and move on. So something I like to keep in mind is the fact that we are either winning, so we're doing our best, or we're learning. There is no such thing as failing. And this concept is throughout our life, but it definitely applies to the healthcare worker. So we're winning, we're learning. There's no such thing as failure. So Britt and I have talked about some of the things that we can do at work to give our shifts more of a positive focus or to make a personal plan for the day. So if I didn't mention it before, I'm talking about the occupational aspect of holistic health. This is all about our jobs. So I'd like to share what I've been telling myself before shifts to get into a more of a positive mindset. So doing things that we can control are really important because so many things are out of our control, right? So I've been telling myself that I will make one deep connection with a patient today. It's not realistic for me to think that I'm going to make deep connections with every single patient I have because of the lack of time, all of those things. But it is realistic for me to say that if I just make one deep connection, if I really feel like I'm making a difference in one person's life today, I will have done what I came here to do. And so I can leave that day, if I accomplish that goal, I can leave that day feeling like I did what I came to do, rather than maybe feeling like I didn't quite live up to perfection. So I know that Britt has some other suggestions that you might like to share.
Oh, that was so well said, Amy. I just want to second that. Like, I really believe setting those bite-sized goals that are measurable, that we're in total control over, that's huge. There's a psychologist, Dr. Craig Manning, who talks about this. He's actually a sports psychologist, but it totally applies in healthcare as well, where I think, a lot of the time we can get caught up in like these ego goals that are like, I want to be the best nurse. I don't want I don't want any of my patients to do badly today. And I'm gonna, we set all these perfectionist kind of goals. And they're very hard to measure, very hard to meet. We get inside our own heads, we get very emotional. And he really talks about the importance for athletes, and I think in our job as well, to set these very measurable little bite-sized goals for ourselves that we're in total control over, right? And so I love that, Amy. That's actually a goal I've also set for myself on shifts. And because as we do that, right, if you every time you're able to do that, meet that goal that you set for yourself for the day, that builds your confidence a little bit too. It gives you a little hit of positive emotion no matter how bad your shift was. And
Mhm.
that's also going to build our resiliency. So I really love that. And so yeah, I would often do that one. And then I would also sometimes do kind of a like a another goal that would be a little bit more like I want to attempt a ultrasound guided IV today if I can. You know, that you're not in total control of that. Something crazy might happen. You might be stuck one-on-one with a patient, not be able to. But that would be a goal you could set for a 12-hour shift where you're just setting a goal for yourself that's like, hey, that's a skill I haven't done in a while. I want to master that. I'm going to make myself do at least one of those today. And then it's like, hey, even if I attempted one and that was like a growth opportunity for me, it's going to build my confidence. And so I think setting those small goals are huge because I think it helps combat that sense of dread where we walking into a shift, maybe there's a million ambulances in the bay, or we see there's a bunch of hold patients or whatever, and we're already like, oh, this is just gonna be a terrible shift, right? When we shift out of that feeling to, okay, what are my goals for today for myself? And set it and maybe one of those goals is I'm actually going to take a break today, right? The break that I'm entitled to, something like that. And then it's like, okay, no matter what happens on this shift, I can still win. You know, I can still walk away saying, yeah, okay, a lot of things were really rough, but check, I did those two things and I feel really good about my shifter. And I think the meaningful connection one, Amy, is probably like the best one ever because that's ticking off a lot of those things that are working against us, right? That loss of connection, community, and those kinds of loss of values, those kinds of things that drive burnout. It's directly combating that when you're connecting with a patient. You are combating those drivers, and so I think that's
Yeah.
a fabulous idea.
I mean,
Yeah.
to me, that's my favorite part about being a nurse is connecting with people and being there in a way for them that other people don't have the opportunity to do. I mean, how many complete strangers tell you all about their lives and what's going on, and you have an opportunity to, help them when they really need it. That's great. That's the best part of my job. Okay, so the next section would be intellectual. So we're going to talk about the fact that we live in our heads most of the time. So we're always thinking, we're always analyzing. Um, and I want to discuss more specifically how our sense of having control over a situation, um, where does that come from, and how does it pertain to the workplace? So how much I want you to ask yourself how much of your life is spent in the guilt or regret of the past. So I should have, I could have, I wish I would have, right? And how much time is spent worrying about the future? So, oh boy, what's going to happen if I don't make more money, or if I make a mistake, or if I get sick, right? I find that people spend a lot of time worrying about the past or the future and not spending enough time in the moment. Um, so I love this quote by Mark Twain. Worrying is like paying a debt you don't owe. I love that. I used to be a worry wart. It's just how I dealt with control. And I've really worked hard not to do that anymore. Changing a mindset. So we spend a lot of energy on worrying about things we can't control. And then what we want to shift that mindset to is being focused on what we're doing in the moment, right? Being truly present. Um, Fear or worry and control are two sides of the same coin, really. So, what does a typical human do to feel like they're in control of something they fear? Well, they worry about it, they ruminate on it, they project about what's going to happen instead of just living in the moment and not letting that fear take over. So, fear is a natural emotion to us, right? It was created in humans to protect us from threats. Fear is survival instinct that comes from the amygdala in there. If you remember your pathophys, uh, the amygdala is part of the limbic system in the central nervous system, right? And this is an area where we link behavior, emotional control, and learning. So you can see how the fear response becomes involved with specific behaviors like worrying and linking extreme emotions to fear. But when fear becomes chronic and we can't stop returning to fearful thoughts, it's a clue that our internal response, our coping mechanisms, are sidelined by past trauma and that they need development. So, a lot of us, especially us ER nurses, we live in a perpetual state of sympathetic nervous system activation. Cortisol, 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 go, 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 go. There's a constant elevation of epinephrine, norepi, and cortisol in our bodies, right? It's just, we run on that. And when we're not running on that, we're running on caffeine or energy drinks or things like that. And we're living in this chronic stress. And we know that chronic stress increases the risk for heart disease, cancer, cirrhosis, accidents, suicides, right? So we need to find a way where we can bring that down, right? So chronic fearful thinking is a need to focus our energy on potential threats so we can protect ourselves, right? So we imagine that if we worry about something, then we can't be surprised by it, right? Worrying makes us feel like we're in control. So think of all the energy that you've channeled into future situations that have never happened, right? I think that as healthcare workers, we're like worst case scenario type people. We want to plan for what might happen. And that's a good thing in our job, but it can also backfire on us, right? So real fears do exist in our workplace. We work in a dangerous environment. It's healthy and normal to have some amounts of fear because we're exposed to contagious diseases. We might fear for our safety from violent patients or family members, right? We have fear of making mistakes that could result in patient harm. But we can work through these types of fears by preparing ourselves, right? So there's things that we do in our job every day. We follow the guidelines. We wear the proper PPE. We look up stuff when we can't remember what to do or what action the medicine takes or what are the side effects. We look all that stuff up, right? We learn our code algorithms. And we learn from our mistakes, right? We can also share our mistakes so that we're learning, but we're allowing the people around us to learn from our mistakes. And then hopefully they're able to do the same, where we're all learning from each other. We want to create an environment where it's okay to talk about things that happened without judgment.